A year ago, my parents kicked me out of their house saying there was no more room. I'm Kristen Holt, 32, a freelance data analyst in Duluth, Minnesota. I'd hit a rough patch financially, so I asked to stay with them temporarily. Instead, they chose my sister and her 3 kids, telling me, "There's just no space for you." It stung, but I picked myself up. I worked overtime, analyzed endless datasets, and saved every penny to buy my own 1-bedroom apartment. It's not much, but it's mine, my sanctuary, after years of being the overlooked kid. Fast forward to last month. I'm settling into my new place when my parents and sister show up at my door unannounced. They didn't come to celebrate my hard-earned success. No, they had the nerve to demand I hand over my apartment to my sister. She needs it more. My mom said, her voice dripping with guilt trip tactics. Her kids can't grow up in a cramped house. My sister chimed in, acting like she was entitled to my home, as if my years of struggle meant nothing. I told them flat out, "This is my place. I'm not moving." Their faces turned red and the shouting started. They stormed off, but I could tell they weren't done. Something in their eyes screamed they'd try something unthinkable to get their way. You won't believe how far they went to take what's mine. Stick around to see how I fought back against their betrayal. If you've ever faced family betrayal like this, smash that subscribe button and drop your story in the comments below. Growing up in Duluth, I always felt like the odd one out in my family. Caitlin, my older sister, was the golden child, the one my parents doted on endlessly. I was the shadow in her spotlight, constantly overlooked, my efforts ignored unless I stepped out of line. It wasn't just a childish grudge, it was a pattern that defined my life. As kids, Caitlin got the best of everything. Every Christmas, she'd rip open packages filled with brand new toys, a sparkling dollhouse, a sleek scooter, while I was handed her old, worn-out things like a teddy bear with a torn ear or a bike with wobbly wheels. "You don't mind, do you?" Kristen Mom would say, barely glancing my way. I did mind, but my complaints fell on deaf ears. Dad was just as bad, always boasting about Caitlin's drawings or her spelling bee wins, even when I brought home straight A's. I remember one time in 6th grade, I built a model rocket for a science fair and won first place. At dinner, I waited for a pat on the back, but all they talked about was Caitlin's cheerleading tryouts. It was like my achievements were invisible. The favoritism only grew as we hit our teens. When Caitlin started high school, my parents bought her a shiny new laptop for her assignments. I had to make do with the family's ancient computer, which crashed every other hour. I'd beg for a turn, but Caitlin always got priority. "She's got important projects," Dad would say, waving me off. When I got into college with a partial scholarship, I thought they'd finally notice me. Instead, they threw a party for Caitlin's high school graduation, spending hundreds on decorations, while I got a half-hearted "good job, Kristen." I learned to stop expecting their praise and started building my own path. The breaking point came a year ago. My freelance data analysis work had hit a slump. Clients were pulling back, and my bank account was dwindling. I had nowhere else to turn, so I went to my parents' house, hoping for a temporary place to stay. I wasn't asking for a handout, just a room to regroup. They sat me down at their kitchen table, faces cold, and said, "There's no more room here." Caitlin and her 3 kids had taken over the house. Her oldest son's toys were everywhere, her daughter's clothes piled in the hallway. "Her kids need a stable home," Mom said, her voice firm. "You're tough, Kristen. You'll manage." Dad didn't even look up from his coffee. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they dismissed me, like I was an inconvenience they couldn't be bothered with. I walked out, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. I rented a tiny studio apartment in Duluth, a shoebox with creaky floors and a leaky faucet. But it was mine, and I was determined to make it work. I dove into my data analysis gigs, taking on projects from local businesses, building sales reports, analyzing customer trends, anything to pay the bills. I'd work late into the night, my laptop screen the only light in the room, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer stubbornness. I took online courses to learn new tools like Python and Tableau to make my work stand out. Every contract I landed felt like a small victory, every paycheck a step toward something bigger. It wasn't easy. There were weeks when I barely made rent, days when I wondered if I'd ever get ahead. But I kept pushing, driven by the memory of my parents' cold rejection. "You'll manage" echoed in my head, not as encouragement, but as a challenge to prove them wrong. By last summer, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a one-bedroom apartment. It was small, with just enough space for a desk and a bed, but signing those papers felt like breaking free. I'd built something on my own without their help. I thought I'd left their favoritism behind for good. But I had no idea how much further they'd go to put Caitlin first. One winter evening, I came home to find my parents' car parked outside my apartment. My stomach sank. They hadn't called or texted in months, not since I'd moved into my new place. I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. As I climbed the stairs, my keys jingling in my hand, I braced myself for whatever they were about to throw at me. I opened the door, and there they were, Mom, Dad, and Caitlin, standing in my living room like they owned the place. Mom's arms were crossed, her lips pursed in that familiar, disapproving frown. Dad stood by the window, avoiding my gaze, while Caitlin lounged on my couch, her posture dripping with entitlement. Her 3 kids weren't with her, but I could already guess what this was about. I dropped my bag and said, "What are you doing here? You didn't even call." Mom spoke first, her voice soft but laced with guilt trip tactics. "Kristen, we need to talk about this apartment. It's not right for you to keep it all to yourself." I blinked, stunned. Before I could respond, Caitlin leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You've got this whole place, Kristen, and I'm stuck at Mom and Dad's with my kids in a tiny room. They need space to grow, to play. You don't even have a family." Her words hit like a slap, but it was her smug tone that made my blood boil. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my home. I worked for it. I'm not giving it up." Dad finally looked at me, his face hard. "Don't be selfish, Kristen. Caitlin's kids deserve a proper home. You're young. You can start over." Start over. After everything I'd been through, I clenched my fists, feeling the anger bubble up. "You kicked me out a year ago because there was no room for me," I shot back. "Now you want my apartment? That's not how this works." Mom stepped closer, her eyes welling up, playing the emotional card. "Think about your nieces and nephew, Kristen. They're just kids. They need a better life. You're doing fine on your own." Her tears didn't move me. They felt like a performance. Caitlin chimed in, her voice sharp. "You've always been so independent, Kristen. Why can't you just let me have this? It's not like you need all this space." She gestured at my modest living room as if it were a mansion. I couldn't believe her nerve, acting like my hard-earned home was hers to claim. The argument escalated fast. I raised my voice, something I rarely did with them. "I paid for every inch of this place with my own money. You don't get to waltz in and demand it." Caitlin stood up, stepping toward me, her face flushed. "You're so greedy, Kristen. My kids are suffering and you don't even care." I held my ground, pointing at the door. "You don't get to guilt me into this. I'm not leaving my home." Mom tried to play peacemaker, her voice trembling. "Let's not fight, Kristen. Just think about it for the kids' sake." But I was done listening. Their words echoed the same favoritism I'd endured my whole life. Caitlin's needs always trumped mine. I crossed my arms and said, "You need to leave. This is my apartment, and I'm not giving it to anyone." Dad shook his head, muttering, "You're making a big mistake." Caitlin grabbed her coat, glaring at me. "This isn't over, Kristen," she spat, storming toward the door. As they left, Mom gave me one last pleading look, but I didn't budge. I locked the door behind them, my heart pounding. Their audacity left me shaken, but I wasn't surprised. They'd always put Caitlin first, and now they thought they could take what I'd built. I stood in my quiet apartment, staring at the walls I'd made my own, and knew this fight was far from finished. They weren't going to stop, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. A few weeks later, I received a strange email from the apartment management company. The subject line read, "Ownership transfer request," and my heart stopped. I opened it, scanning the words a form had been submitted to change my apartment's title to someone named Caitlin. My hands shook as I read it again, the realization hitting me like a punch. My family hadn't just demanded my home, they were trying to steal it. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, my mind racing. How could they do this? The email mentioned documents with my signature, but I hadn't signed anything. I grabbed my phone and called Brooke, my friend and a lawyer. "Kristen, slow down," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This sounds like fraud. You need evidence. Start recording any conversations with them. Minnesota's a one-party consent state, so you're good." She told me to check my records, contact the management company, and confront my family, but only with a plan. I thanked her, my resolve hardening. If they thought they could forge my name and take my apartment, they were about to meet a side of me they'd never seen. I called the management company first. The agent confirmed a transfer request had been filed, complete with a notarized document bearing my supposed signature. "That's not mine," I said, my voice tight. "I never agreed to this." The agent promised to freeze any changes until I could provide proof, but I needed to act fast. That night, I set up my phone's voice recorder app, testing it to make sure it worked. I wasn't just angry, I was ready to fight. The next day, I drove to my parents' house, my phone tucked in my pocket, already recording. I hadn't been there since they kicked me out over a year ago, and the sight of their familiar front door made my stomach twist. I knocked, and Mom opened the door, her face flickering with surprise. "Kristen, what are you doing here?" she asked, stepping aside. Dad was in the living room flipping through a newspaper while Caitlin sat at the dining table scrolling on her phone. No one looked happy to see me. I didn't waste time. "I got an email from the apartment management," I said, my voice steady. "Someone tried to transfer my apartment to Caitlin. With a forged signature." Mom's eyes widened and Dad put down his paper, his jaw tightening. Caitlin didn't even look up, but her fingers froze on her phone. "That's ridiculous," Mom said, her voice too high. "Why would you think we'd do that?" I pulled out a copy of the email, holding it up. "This says my signature's on the transfer form. I didn't sign anything." "So who did?" Caitlin finally met my gaze, her expression cold. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is, Kristen," she said, leaning back. Maybe it was a mistake I pressed on, keeping my tone calm but sharp. "A mistake doesn't forge my name." "Who sent those papers?" Dad shifted uncomfortably, but Mom jumped in, her voice trembling. "We were just trying to help Caitlin and her kids, Kristen. You wouldn't give up the apartment, so we thought you'd steal it." I cut her off, my voice rising. "You forged my signature." Dad finally spoke, his tone gruff. "We didn't forge anything. We just signed for you. It's for the kids." I couldn't believe it. They admitted it right there while my phone recorded every word. Caitlin stood up, pointing at me. "You're so selfish, Kristen. My kids need that apartment and you're hoarding it like it's a palace." Mom nodded, tears in her eyes. "We didn't want to hurt you. We just wanted what's best for Caitlin's family." I held up my hand, stopping them. "You don't get to decide what's mine. I have proof of this fraud and I'm not letting it go." Caitlin's face turned red. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "You always do this, Kristen, making everything about you." Mom chimed in, her voice desperate. "Please, Kristen, don't make this a fight. Just let Caitlin have the apartment." I shook my head, my resolve like steel. "No, this is my home and I'm done letting you walk all over me." The argument grew louder, their voices overlapping with accusations. Caitlin called me heartless, saying I didn't care about her kids. Mom pleaded, claiming I was tearing the family apart. Dad just sat there muttering about my stubbornness. But I stood firm, my phone capturing every damning word. "You crossed a line," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "You tried to steal from me, and I have it all recorded." Their faces paled, and for the first time they looked scared. I left the house, my heart pounding but my mind clear. I had the evidence I needed, and I wasn't backing down. They thought they could bully me into giving up my home, but I was ready to protect what was mine no matter what it took. One night, I came home to find Caitlin's stuff piled up in my living room. Boxes of her kids' toys, stuffed animals, plastic trucks, and glittery dolls were stacked against my couch. A pile of clothes, some still in garbage bags, spilled across my rug. My jaw dropped as I spotted Caitlin in my kitchen unpacking a box of her daughter's shoes like she lived there. My heart raced with a mix of shock and fury. This wasn't just a visit she was moving in without my permission. "Caitlin, what are you doing?" I demanded, dropping my keys on the counter. She turned unfazed and shrugged. "This is for my kids, Kristen. They can't stay cramped at Mom and Dad's forever." Her casual tone, like she had every right to invade my home, made my blood boil. I stepped closer, my voice shaking. "You can't just move your stuff in here. This is my apartment." Caitlin rolled her eyes, tossing a pair of sneakers onto my table. "Stop being so dramatic, Kristen. I'm not taking your place. I'm just making it work for my family." I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. She had no key, no permission, nothing. How did she even get in? My mind flashed to the spare key I kept in a drawer. Had she taken it during her last visit? I didn't have time to figure it out. I grabbed my phone and called Brooke, my hands trembling as I explained the situation. "She's moving her kids' stuff into my apartment, Brooke." "What do I do?" Brooke's voice was steady, cutting through my panic. "Don't confront her alone. Call the police, Kristen. You've got the recording from the forgery attempt. That's your leverage. Show them you're the legal owner and she's trespassing." I hung up and dialed 911, my heart pounding as I gave the operator my address. While waiting, I tried reasoning with Caitlin one last time. "You need to take your stuff and leave, Caitlin. This isn't your home." She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "You're so selfish, Kristen. My kids deserve this place more than you do." Her words stung, but I wasn't backing down. I stood by the door, arms crossed, until the police arrived. 2 officers knocked, and I let them in, my voice steady as I explained. "This is my apartment. I own it." She moved in without my permission. I showed them my lease agreement and the deed, both clearly in my name. Caitlin interrupted, her voice loud and indignant. "I'm just trying to give my kids a better life. Kristen doesn't need all this space." The officers ignored her, asking for her ID. I handed them my phone, playing the recording from my confrontation with my parents and Caitlin. The audio was clear. Dad admitting they signed for me. Caitlin calling me selfish for not giving up my home. The officers listened, their expressions hardening. One officer turned to Caitlin. "Ma'am, you need to remove your belongings. This isn't your property." Caitlin's face turned red and she started shouting. "This is ridiculous. Kristen's just jealous because I have kids. She's trying to ruin us." She pointed at me, her voice rising to a scream. "You're heartless, Kristen. You don't care about your own family." I stayed calm, letting her words bounce off me. The second officer stepped between us, his tone firm. "Calm down, ma'am. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to escort you out." Caitlin kept yelling, grabbing a box and throwing shoes onto the floor in a tantrum. "You'll regret this, Kristen," she screamed, her voice echoing in my small apartment. The officers didn't hesitate. They warned her about trespassing charges and potential fraud if she continued meddling with my property. "You're lucky she's not pressing charges for the forged documents," one officer said, glancing at me. I nodded, my resolve unshaken. I wanted her out, not in jail yet. It took an hour, but Caitlin finally started packing her stuff, muttering curses under her breath. The officers supervised, ensuring she didn't damage anything. As she dragged the last box out, she glared at me, her eyes burning with resentment. "This isn't over, Kristen," she hissed. I didn't respond, just held the door open until she was gone. The officers gave me a card with their contact info, advising me to change my locks and file a restraining order if this happened again. "You've got solid evidence," one said. "Don't let them push you around." After they left, I sank onto my couch, staring at the empty space where Caitlin's stuff had been. My apartment felt violated, but I'd stood my ground. With Brooke's advice and the police backing me, I'd stopped Caitlin's latest scheme. But her final words lingered, and I knew she wasn't done trying to take what was mine. I had to stay one step ahead no matter how far she'd go. A few weeks later, a relative texted me about a rumor going around the family. My cousin, who'd always been the one to spill family secrets, sent a cryptic message. "You need to know what Caitlin's been up to with your parents' money." My stomach tightened. After everything her demands for my apartment, the forged documents, and moving her kids' stuff into my home, I thought I'd seen the worst of Caitlin's schemes. Apparently, I was wrong. I called my cousin pressing for details. She hesitated at first, then spilled everything. Caitlin had been dipping into Mom and Dad's retirement savings, the fund they'd spent decades building for their future. My cousin had seen Caitlin flaunting a new designer handbag at a family dinner, followed by posts on social media showing off expensive dresses and jewelry. It didn't add up. She had no job, lived with my parents, and relied on them for everything. My cousin dug deeper and found transactions on Mom and Dad's bank statements, thousands spent on luxury stores, all tied to Caitlin's name. "They're enabling her?" My cousin said, her voice heavy with frustration. "They don't even see how she's draining them." I asked my cousin to send me proof. She emailed me scanned copies of the bank statements highlighting purchases at high-end boutiques and online retailers. One receipt showed a $2,000 handbag charged to Mom's account, another for $1,500 in designer clothes, all within weeks. My parents weren't rich. Their retirement fund was meant to cover their basic needs, not Caitlin's shopping sprees. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal, not just for me, but for Mom and Dad, who'd been manipulated yet again by their golden child. I sat at my desk staring at the evidence, my mind racing. I'd spent years fighting their favoritism, protecting my own life from their schemes. But this was different. Caitlin wasn't just hurting me. She was jeopard of stealing from our parents' future. I thought about keeping quiet, letting it slide to avoid more drama. But I couldn't. They needed to know, and so did the rest of the family. I remembered Brooke's advice about staying strategic, so I decided to expose the truth in a way no one could ignore. I opened the family group chat, a place usually filled with birthday wishes and holiday plans. My hands shook as I typed a message, keeping it calm but direct. "I have proof Caitlin's been using Mom and Dad's retirement savings for her own luxury purchases. Here are the bank statements." I attached the scanned documents, each one a damning piece of evidence. I hit send, my heart pounding, knowing this would blow everything open. Within minutes, the chat exploded with replies from aunts, uncles, and cousins. "How could she do this?" One uncle wrote. "This is disgusting," a cousin added. No one defended Caitlin, not even Mom or Dad. Caitlin responded an hour later, her message full of deflection. "You're lying, Kristen. Those statements are fake," but the family wasn't buying it. My aunt, who'd always been skeptical of Caitlin's excuses, replied, "The bank doesn't lie. You've gone too far." Another cousin chimed in, "You're living rent-free with your kids and still taking their money. Shame on you." I stayed silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. Mom sent a vague message about sorting this out privately, but the damage was done. The family's trust in them was crumbling. I called Brooke to update her, needing her perspective. "You did the right thing," she said. "They can't hide from this now. Just be ready. They might lash out." She was right. The next day, Caitlin sent me a furious text. "You've ruined everything, Kristen. You're tearing this family apart." I didn't respond. Her words didn't hurt anymore. They just sounded desperate. Mom called, her voice trembling with anger. "Why would you air our business like that? Kristen, you've embarrassed us." I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not the one who stole from you. Maybe you should ask Caitlin why she did." She hung up without another word. The fallout was swift. Family members stopped inviting Mom, Dad, and Caitlin to gatherings. My uncle, who handled Mom and Dad's finances, froze their accounts to prevent further misuse. Cousins who once stayed neutral now openly criticized Caitlin's behavior, calling her reckless and entitled. Mom and Dad's silence spoke volumes. They'd enabled her for years, and now they were paying the price with their reputation. I felt a strange sense of vindication, like the truth had finally caught up with them. For once, I wasn't the villain in their story, but I wasn't naive. Caitlin's text and Mom's call told me they weren't done. They'd already tried to take my apartment, forged documents, and trespassed. Exposing their financial deceit was a victory, but it also painted a target on my back. I knew they'd come up with something else, some new way to punish me for standing my ground. As I sat in my apartment, now secure with new locks, I braced myself for whatever they'd try next. I'd fought too hard to let them win now. On Thanksgiving. The knock on my door startled me. I hadn't invited anyone, expecting a quiet evening alone. Through the peephole, I saw Mom clutching a pie, Dad shifting awkwardly, and Caitlin standing with her arms crossed, her face set in a forced smile. My stomach churned. After everything they'd done, they thought they could just walk back into my life. I opened the door, my expression cold, ready for whatever they were about to try. Mom spoke first, holding out the pie like a peace offering. "Kristen, we just want to talk. It's Thanksgiving. Let's put this behind us." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but I wasn't fooled. Caitlin stepped forward, her tone overly sweet. "I'm sorry for everything, Kristen. Can we start over? My kids need a stable place, maybe just for a few months." Dad nodded, adding, "We're family, Kristen. We should stick together." Their words sounded rehearsed, like they'd planned this to guilt me into submission. I stood in the doorway, blocking their path. "You think an apology fixes this?" I asked, my voice steady but sharp. "You kicked me out, tried to steal my apartment, forged my signature, and let Caitlin drain your retirement savings. And now you want me to let her move in." Mom's face fell, her hands tightening around the pie. Caitlin's smile vanished, replaced by a scowl. "You're holding grudges, Kristen," she snapped. I said, "I'm sorry. My kids shouldn't suffer because you can't let go." I took a deep breath, my anger rising but controlled. "Let's be clear," I said, looking at each of them. "You forged documents to take my home. Caitlin, you moved your stuff in without permission, and you spent thousands of Mom and Dad's savings on handbags and clothes. You don't get to walk in here with a pie and expect me to forget." Dad's face reddened and he muttered, "You're exaggerating, Kristen. We made mistakes, but we're trying to make it right." Mom chimed in, her voice trembling. "We just want what's best for everyone, especially the kids." Their excuses were the same tired script, always about Caitlin's kids, never about what they'd done to me. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. "You've crossed too many lines. I'm done with this." Caitlin stepped closer, her voice rising. "You're so cruel, Kristen. You'd rather see my kids suffer than help your own family." Her words were meant to sting, but they only fueled my determination. "Your kids aren't my responsibility," I shot back. "You made your choices, and I'm not paying for them anymore." The argument escalated, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mess. Mom started crying, saying, "You're breaking our family apart, Kristen." Dad raised his voice, pointing at me. "You're being unreasonable. We're trying to fix this." Caitlin kept shouting, "You're heartless, Kristen. You've always been jealous of me." I stood my ground, my heart pounding but my mind clear. "You don't get to rewrite history," I said, my voice cutting through their noise. "You betrayed me over and over. I want you out of my life." I stepped back, my hand on the door. "Leave. Now. And don't contact me again." Mom gasped, clutching Dad's arm. "You don't mean that, Kristen," she pleaded. But I did. Caitlin glared at me, her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this." "Kristen," she hissed, shoving past Mom toward the door. Dad grabbed her arm, muttering, "Let's go," but not before shooting me a disappointed look. I didn't flinch. They'd lost any claim to my loyalty long ago. As they walked away, Mom's sobs echoed in the hallway, but I felt no guilt. I closed the door and locked it, the sound of the deadbolt clicking like a final punctuation mark. I stood in my quiet apartment, the weight of their betrayal lifting for the first time in years. I'd fought for this place for my independence, and I wasn't letting them take it or me down. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was finally free, and I'd never let them drag me back into their chaos. 6 months later, Brooke updated me on my family's situation. We were sipping coffee at a cozy cafe in Duluth, the kind of place I'd come to love for its quiet warmth. Brooke, always the one to keep tabs on things, leaned forward with a serious look. "You won't believe what's happened to Caitlin and your parents," she said, her voice low but firm. I braced myself, unsure if I wanted to hear it, but knowing I needed to. Brooke explained that Caitlin had lost all financial support from mom and dad. After the family group chat exposed her spending their retirement savings on designer bags and clothes, my parents cut her off completely. She'd taken a job at a local retail store, working long hours to cover her debts and support her kids. Brooke heard from a mutual acquaintance that Caitlin was living in a rundown rental apartment, barely making ends meet. "It's a small place," Brooke said, "leaky pipes, noisy neighbors. Her kids are struggling, but she's got no one to bail her out now." I nodded, feeling a pang of pity for her kids, but no sympathy for Caitlin. She'd made her choices. Mom and Dad's situation wasn't much better. The bank statements I'd shared in the group chat had forced them to face the reality of their drained savings. To cover the debts Caitlin racked up, they sold their house, the one they'd lived in for decades. Brooke said they'd moved into a cramped condo on the edge of town, far from the family gatherings they once hosted. Relatives had turned their backs, tired of their excuses for Caitlin's behavior. "Your uncle won't even take their calls anymore," Brooke told me. "They're pretty much isolated now." I stared into my coffee, the weight of their downfall settling in. They'd enabled Caitlin for years, and now they were paying the price. Meanwhile, my life was moving in the opposite direction. I'd poured my energy into my data analysis work, taking on new clients and building a reputation that opened doors I never thought possible. I landed a contract with a tech startup analyzing trends that helped them grow, and my income was steadier than ever. My apartment, once a battleground, felt like a sanctuary again. New locks, fresh paint, and no trace of Caitlin's chaos. I started hosting game nights with Brooke and a few close friends, people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. We'd laugh over board games, share stories, and plan weekend hikes along Lake Superior. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life that was truly mine. Looking back, I realized how far I'd come. Cutting off my family wasn't just about protecting my apartment, it was about reclaiming my self-worth. They'd tried to take everything from me: my home, my peace, even my sense of belonging. But each time I'd fought back with Brooke's advice, a recorded conversation, or a locked door. I learned that standing up for myself meant drawing hard lines even when it hurt. Letting go of toxic relationships, no matter how close, gave me the freedom to live on my terms. I wasn't the villain they'd painted me as. I was someone who chose to survive. Sitting in that cafe with Brooke, I felt a quiet pride. My family's schemes had backfired, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions. Caitlin was scraping by, mom and dad were alone, and I was thriving. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. I'd protected what was mine and built something better in its place. As Brooke and I finished our coffee, she smiled and said, "You're unstoppable, Kristen." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Maybe I was. Thank you for following my story. If you've ever dealt with family drama or have advice on handling selfish relatives, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories like this.